Hey everyone, this is Brian from the Tennis IQ podcast. Josh and I hope that you are enjoying the content and discussions that we put out week after week. If you'd like to support the podcast and help us to continue to produce quality episodes, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Currently, we have 3 tiers of support: the fan level at $3 per month, the supporter level at $7 per month, and the champion level at $20 per month. Benefits of joining the Tennis IQ podcast community include episode transcripts, participation in book club discussions, and access to monthly masterclasses with me and Josh. For more on these benefits of support, head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Thank you so much. And now, on to the show. Welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. In today's episode, we are going to be discussing Roger Federer's recent commencement address at Dartmouth University. And we're going to be talking about a few themes that he brought up. He sort of separated the speech, the address into 3 main themes. So we will certainly talk about those, and then also some other themes that we picked up on, and some connections between some of the things that he was saying to what people can do when they step onto the court. Because I think that he brought up some important, sort of big picture themes, but which can also connect to some of the specific tools and skills that we often talk about on this show. Things like resetting between points, and having perspective, and just work ethic and things like that he touched on, that he touched on in this speech. So the way that he broke down the speech, and he certainly included plenty of funny moments and references to Dartmouth and things like that. But he essentially broke it down into 3 main parts. The first being that effortless is a myth, right? He was sort of told throughout his career and sort of referred to as playing in this sort of effortless style. So he talks about that, and we can definitely touch on that and sort of the way that he views it and sort of how he pushed back on that. Talked about this idea of it only being a point, and playing point by point, and the necessity of putting points behind you and resetting. And then lastly, he talked about life is bigger than the court, and being able to, have perspective in different ways and find purpose, which he really seemed to do both throughout his career and also after. So Brian, wanted to see maybe if we were to start with that first theme, that effortless is a myth. Wanted to see some of your thoughts on the speech in this regard, and also just maybe what you thought of this particular concept.
So overall, I think it's well worth watching. So we can put a link to it in the show notes. Many of you have maybe seen it already. It's prominently featured on YouTube. It's about a 25-minute speech overall, but it flows nicely. And I think you did a good job, Josh, of distilling out his 3, he called them tennis lessons, right? I thought that was cool. So the 3 lessons. And I think the first one was probably the most personal to him. Effortless is a myth. And in a way, maybe he's responding to some things that were said about him during his career. Nothing derogatory, of course, but I think in some ways, when people look at Roger Federer's game and describe it as effortless, or him as someone who's supremely talented, it takes away some of the credit that he justly deserves for how hard he worked to get to this place. He even noted that he left, home at age 14. He stopped going to school around age 16 to dedicate himself to his tennis. If this was all about just talent and effortless, that's not what he would have done. He just would have just been a regular kid, just showed up on the pro tour and started winning. That's, of course, that is not how it happened. And so that was the one I was like, of the three, the most interested in to hear how he talked about that, because we live, I think, Josh, in a very sort of talent focused society. When you hear commentators on TV, they often will comment on a player's talent level. And they don't necessarily bring into that perspective the amount of work it took to get there. Roger, in this speech, did refer to the concept of grit. We had a good episode on grit. And Angela Duckworth, who wrote the book entitled Grit, talked about how talent is really nothing without hard work. Talent is nothing without effort. And so she has this kind of cool equation where she says that effort counts twice. So talent times effort equals skill. Skill times effort equals achievement. And I think maybe even in our episode, maybe we said this, maybe I read it somewhere else, but like achievement also leads to mastery, right? So skill times effort, not only achievement, but also leads to mastery, which, makes me think of Roger Federer, right? He's certainly someone who became a master. I think that was also the title of Christopher Clary's book about Roger, right? The Master, which I have up on the shelf behind me, if people can see that. So I really thought this was a good one, Josh, because if we think about Roger Federer and how he played tennis, how would we normally describe even his movement on the court? Oh, he's floating around the court. Oh, he looks so loose. What he's doing, it looks like he's hardly, putting out any effort. Everything's just flowing, and as if that just happened, as if he was just born to be that way. And so I thought it was great for him to describe a little bit of the process that went into creating that brand of tennis that he really made. I mean, I don't think anybody who's seen Roger Federer will really forget the style of it. It's just beautiful. I think that's why so many fans fell in love with Federer as a player, because he just appeared to be this sort of balletic performer, this artist out on the court. And I think it was very good for Federer to detail, hey, that didn't just happen. That was very purposeful work that I did for many years on the court, physically, mentally, emotionally, and that was the end product. And so I thought that was really, to me, the most personal of the three, and a really good point. So I'd love to hear what your take is on that one.
Yeah, a couple things. I think, first of all, it's important to recognize the training that he did throughout his career. I mean, he was known, again, people would say in a similar way, so effortless. He never sweats. That's another one that I would hear quite a bit. And there's reasons for this, right? He would train during his off season, which for pro tennis players, those it tends to be quite short. But he would train during the off season in Dubai in often 110 or more degree heat. And, so then when he would play in Australia just a few weeks later, and, I think many people are familiar, the temperatures often get over 100 degrees there. Yes, he would feel it, but he wouldn't necessarily be impacted by the other like the other players were. So I think part of it is, we can recognize that it's not effortless. It actually comes from a lot of hard work physically, but also mentally. And I think probably, some people are familiar with this, but when he entered the pro scene, when he started playing pro tournaments, he was known for being a hothead. He would break rackets. He would, yell and swear and things like that. And not really, he wasn't this example of cool, calm, and collected as he was, for the vast majority of his career. And he talks about this in the speech. He talks about a situation at the Italian Open where a player said that Federer would be the favorite for the first 2 hours, and then after that, um, they would be the favorite. That essentially Federer wouldn't be able to sort of keep it together the entire time. And he brought, Roger brought this up as sort of a turning point for him. That, it wasn't just maybe his coach or family that had told him to make this change, but it was also his peers. And I think it demonstrates that, he he needed to, in order to get to the top of the game where he obviously wound up, and and even to play in this quote unquote effortless way that he really became famous for. It took a tremendous amount of hard work, both mentally and physically. The hours spent in Dubai, but also the mental work, and we'll talk about this I think a little bit later when we talk about his second concept of it only being a point, and the necessity of putting points behind you, resetting, keeping things in perspective. But that could take time, right? When somebody's 18 or 19 or 20 or whatever it may be, and they're starting to play at this global stage. It can be really hard to keep it together. It can be hard to handle those ups and downs, and he struggled with that, and he's been open about that. So I think it's just important to understand that not only were things always effortless for him, but he's also human, and he also had to work really hard to to get to where he wound up, and had to overcome quite a bit on the mental side of things. And I don't think he would have been able to get where he was, or anywhere close, had he not overcome that side of things. So I think that's definitely an important point there, that that there was plenty of effort mentally and physically that went into him playing in this effortless sort of style.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the message for us as watchers or listeners of this particular speech is that don't discount the amount of work that goes into becoming your best, and embrace that part of it. When you work so hard, look what could happen. And he's a great example. And I think he also had an idea of this is the way he wanted to play, and so that's how they structured a lot of his training. I liked the fact that he brought up that story. I don't think either one of us had heard about that piece of the rival calling him out, saying that Federer would be the favorite for the first 2 hours. I'll be the favorite for the next two. And then he, expressing somewhat being somewhat confused by that statement, but then getting it, as you said, and then being really thankful to his peers for that, which also it reminded me of Novak Djokovic being thankful to Federer and Nadal. I think it was after the 2020 Australian Open in his victory speech, for pushing him to have to be better in order to win titles and to become number one. So it's also a great message there, Josh, that the people who are our peers are not just our opponents. They're actually, in some way, our partners in the development of us becoming our best, if we are able to look at it that way. If we can treat them as, maybe standards to aspire to a little bit more. So lesson number two was it's only a point. So would love to hear your take on this one first.
Yeah. So first a quote. So he says, and I think people who certainly have listened to our podcast before and have maybe heard us talk about this concept, I think this will probably sound familiar. But a quote from Roger from the speech, he says, in the 1,526 singles matches I played in my career, I won almost 80% of those matches. However, and then he revealed that he had only won approximately 54% of the points played in those matches, which I think for a lot of people, when they're first introduced to this concept, is surprising. We think about the best in the world, the players ranked number one, top five, as dominant. And I think those words, just like effortless, I think words like dominant, unbeatable, things like that are thrown around a lot. So I think when we imagine somebody who's won, 4 out of 5 matches that they play, 80% roughly, we imagine somebody who is winning the vast majority of their points. But he demonstrates that it's actually not the case. He won, right around 54% of points. And we see this, and we've talked about some of the research done by Craig O'Shaughnessy on this topic, and that top players on the ATP, WTA tours are only winning, let's say, 53 to 55% of their points. Yet they end up winning the vast majority of their matches. So I think there's different takeaways from this. Sometimes people, will say, "Oh, well, that means they're winning the big points," which is true by and large. They are winning more of the big points. But I think the point that Federer is trying to make here is that it's, we have to be able to play point by point. We have to be able to put points behind us, right? If he wasn't, it seems like earlier in his career he struggled with this, which is something, frankly, that many people struggle with. Maybe most people struggle with. But he talks about, being able to, that you need to be able to lose. You need to be able to lose points. And another quote, he says, "But the truth is, whatever game you play in life, sometimes you're going to lose. A point, a match, a season, a job. It's a roller coaster with many ups and downs." He continues, he says, "Negative energy is wasted energy. You want to become a master of overcoming hard moments. That, to me, is the sign of a champion." So it's all about, this idea that in order to be a champion, in order to be great, to be number one, to win matches, that you have to be able to handle points lost. You have to be able to handle maybe getting broken. You have to be able to handle all those ups and downs because they're going to happen. It's inevitable. And he even says the best in the world are not the best because they win every point. It's because they know they'll lose again and again and have learned how to deal with it. And I think again, it's a theme that we've talked about, but hearing it from somebody like him, with his background, with his achievements, I think really reinforces this point, because not only whether it's a USTA league match or a junior match, or just a friendly match that you're playing with your friend, not only are you gonna deal with those ups and downs, those lost points, those double faults, those missed shots, but the same thing happens to the top pros in the world. Yes, it happens at a higher level. Yes, it looks a little bit different when they lose points, but it really reinforces the importance of this, because without the ability to put points behind you, without the ability to play point by point and play one point at a time, you really can't be great. And I like that he says you want to be a master of overcoming hard moments, which is this idea of trying to be a master in this space, right? Not just Federer as a sort of a master of the sport in general, but him being a master at overcoming hard moments, right? It's almost like we don't want to just control the controllables. We want to sort of master those controllable aspects, like our effort, our attitude, our decision making, our ability to handle hard moments and resetting. So really like this point. Curious, some of your thoughts on this concept.
I think it also ties into, excuse me, the 2 hour thing that his rival talked about. So what happened to Federer after 2 hours? Was there a sudden mental breakdown? Was he getting exhausted? It was most likely not a physical breakdown. And we've talked about the concept of tolerance, the ability to tolerate errors, to tolerate things. And I think that's what he's talking about when he says that champions are the ones who master the hard moments. So he hadn't learned that early in his career yet. And usually it's not, no one really has a sudden mental breakdown. It's usually an accumulation of little things that build up, and then one final thing sort of breaks it wide open. And I think that's what his rival was saying about him. If you can keep him out there for 2 hours, you'll probably get his frustration tolerance to a point where he's not going to be there anymore. So he really had to learn this, to master those hard moments, to really understand, how can I tolerate this? How do I work on that tolerance? And one of the things that he did mention was the necessity of being, fully engaged in the present moment, fully engaged in this point. This point is the most important one. But as you noted, Josh, once it's behind you, you have to put it behind you. So the concept of reset, next point, this is how the game is played. 54% winning percentage of points tells us that on average, you're losing almost every other point. Pretty close to it. And that's a guy who won 20 Grand Slams. The rest of us are probably not winning 54% of our points per year. It very likely lower than that. Maybe not. But I think for a lot of us, we probably lose more than Roger Federer did on the, in some of his best seasons. So yeah, this necessity of putting it behind you, but being, really engaged and present in that point, and then resetting, be engaged and present in the next point, and just know that winning and losing, that's just how it goes. That's the nature of the sport. And if we're unable to tolerate that, then we're fighting reality, and we'll lose that battle every time we engage in it. So this is a really important one for sure. And we've obviously talked about this, but it's such an important one because it's so basic. And a lot of, I think, the mental game for tennis or any sport really is coming down to some of those basic things. Can you be focused in the moment? Can you then bring that to the next moment? All about your attention and concentration, but also understanding the nature of the sport and what it is you're trying to win. So you earlier said, Josh, yeah, some of the better players, they may only win 54%, but they're probably winning the important points. That's probably true. Pretty much has to be true.
Right.
If they're winning matches. So what's a better way to look at things? We don't necessarily need to be perfect about winning points, but can you become a master of holding your serve? To getting to 4 points on your serve before your opponent? Can you learn to become, mastering returning in such a way that you can get to 4 points a couple times in a set before your opponent? These are different ways of looking at it. And if I break somebody's serve at love or after like 10 deuces, who cares? It doesn't matter. It's all right. I have now logged this game in my column as a win. So it's really a lot about understanding what it is we're trying to win. Points are just a means to getting there. And I think the more that we learn to deal with that, and we can do that, through resetting, having routines. It would be very interesting to talk to Federer about time management between points, because if we look at him, Nadal, Djokovic, Murray, I have to say Federer is probably the least structured of those 4 guys. Where Nadal's probably the most, Djokovic sometimes, and this also highlights the fact that when you become really great at focus, you have the choice of how you manage that time between points. It doesn't have to be the 16-second cure. Could be, but it doesn't have to be. And that is really, I think, an individual difference, and everybody has to figure it out. But it would be really interesting to see or hear from him, okay, what are you really trying to do between points to make that happen? What changed for you that allowed you to tolerate frustration and difficult emotions more, that got you to this place where, after 3 years on the tour, you figured it out and then became the Roger Federer that we all remember?
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think, it seems like at that stage in his career, he obviously had the ability. I think he had won Junior Wimbledon. I think he had won Junior Wimbledon and had obviously had a lot of talent and ability, but clearly saw that this was something holding him back. I think just recognizing that that you need to be able to to do this, that you need to be able to reset because the next point really is the most important point, right? He says it himself. He says when you're playing a point, it is the most important thing in the world. And it has to be, right? If we're playing a point and we're not treating it that way, if we're thinking back to the last point and oh, how did I miss that forehand? Or I'm focusing on a line call that my opponent made that I'm sure was incorrect, or how could they make that call, or why am I losing right now? And we're thinking back to the past or thinking towards the future in terms of winning and losing, and maybe the consequences, or what might people think, or what's this going to do to my UTR, or things like that. If we're not treating each point as the most important point and instead thinking back to the past or the future, then we're not giving that point the the due importance that it really deserves. And again, margins are slim. Margins are slim on the ATP Tour, certainly, but within a particular level, right? Whether that's the 3-0 level or the 4-0 level or whatever it may be, margins are slim. And a player not being ready for that next point 100% of the time can be the difference between them winning and losing that match. Can be the difference between them winning and losing that big point, right? I think I think this concept of the best players winning more of those big points is really interesting, right? I think we can think about why that is. It's not like Federer, Djokovic, Nadal, Serena, Iga. It's not like these players want to be losing points. It's not like they're giving away points earlier in the match or not prioritizing those points. To me, and curious your thoughts here, Brian. To me, I think they're trying their hardest every point. I think they just are better at winning those bigger points because they manage to keep it together mentally. They manage to handle that pressure where, the still obviously elite, amazing players that maybe are outside of the top 5, top 10, maybe the guy that's number 25 in the world starts overthinking it, starts maybe doubting themselves, where the legends of the game really have come up with this system and have figured out how to, how to best handle those sorts of moments. Curious what maybe, what your thoughts are on that particular topic.
I agree with how you phrase that, Josh. I think they handle the pressure better. It's, well, you brought it, I think, rightly. Like, all right, what would a top, or a 25 ranked player do? They will probably be the ones to let the pressure get to them more, especially if they're playing a Djokovic or a Federer, the concept of locker room power. And they will probably break their own discipline about how they play. And that's a real leap. We've talked about this idea of learning how not to lose, learning how not to beat yourself. And that happens at every level of the game. And it's until you do that, until you earn, like, Federer talked about that self-belief is something you have to earn. And I would agree. You do have to earn it. And I think, but it has to also begin with some self-efficacy, meaning I believe I can do this. Because the first time you try to do something, you don't necessarily have the evidence that says you can do it. So you have to have a little bit of a leap of faith there that I have the ability to do it. And I think it's when you get into a pressure situation, can you keep your discipline and continue to do what's working, even though there's stress and pressure? Can you not let the moment affect how you conduct yourself? And I think that that's what the best players in the world do, is they're very good at being consistent with how they conduct themselves, where players who are not yet at that level may try things because they think, oh, I have to be aggressive here. The pressure's on. Their perspectives are not quite there yet. So I think that's something that Federer and all the other top players had learned, is this is about me. Yeah, I got to be fully engaged in this moment, but I'm bringing my best stuff. I will not beat myself. The other guy might win the point, but I will not beat myself. And, that was a quote that we heard Nadal say to his Uncle Tony between the fourth and fifth sets at the 2008 Wimbledon, where he said, I will not lose this match. Federer might beat me. I will not lose this match. And that's also something the greats do, right? They master these difficult moments, but they do not beat themselves. And I think that that's a lot of what Roger is getting at here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think in those big points, it's almost expected, in those biggest points of the match, it's almost expected that the pressure will get to people. And I think, we can probably all think of times where the pressure's gotten to us. But I think the best in the world are just simply better at handling it. And they've demonstrated that, and that's why they're ranked the way that they are. That's why they have the accomplishments that they do. And yes, part of it is physical, right? Part of it is they have certain physical tools that other players don't have. But when you get to, a third set tiebreaker or a fifth set, or whatever it may be, it's, and it comes down to a few points here or there. I think it's, that ability to handle the pressure is up there with the most important skills in that sort of a moment.
Yeah.
All right, should we move on to the third point
Lesson.
here?
Yeah, life is bigger than
The
the
third
court.
lesson.
Yeah.
Yep, life is bigger than the court. So yeah, I I think this really resonated with me as well. Both in terms of the impact that this concept had on Roger and sort of the impact that he was able to make, but also what this can mean for other people. He talks about how, you know, he how yes, he was a tennis player, and yes, he was obviously a great tennis player, but that there were other things that were obviously important to him, and it was important to him to have a rewarding life with travel, with culture, friendships, family. He also talks about the work that he's done for those that aren't familiar. He's had I think for right around 20 years now, he's had a really impactful nonprofit that does a lot of work in Africa, and and has just done really incredible things there. So he talks about that life is bigger than just tennis. That he started seeing himself not just as a tennis player, but that was just one piece of what he was and really of what he did. And I think I think this really has an impact on everybody. I think we can all start thinking this way, right? I think if we all view ourselves as just tennis players, if we view our performance as ultimately a reflection on ourselves, rather than tennis is something that I do and something I'm trying to be as good, as good at as I possibly can be, but it's just something that I do. If tennis becomes everything, then those ups and downs, those losses start to feel a lot more impactful because it feels like it really is saying something about us as a person. Where if we're saying, hey, I am not just a tennis player, I am me, and tennis is an important part of my life, but there's other important parts of my life. I think it's a lot easier to handle those ups and downs, but I think we're also able to see the perspective and see the big picture and really make an impact like he has, right? Roger's impact is a lot more than just his wins and losses on the court. Has found sort of a deeper purpose, a deeper calling, and has really made just an incredible difference with the work of his philanthropy and his nonprofit. So I think it's something that we can all take away, where if we're able to see the big picture, keep things in perspective, and understand that tennis is just a piece of us and a piece of what we do, then we're able to, we're able to prioritize some of those other aspects of life.
I think this is an important message for other professional tennis players and other elite athletes, because throughout life, you may hear from coaches, or you certainly hear it from the media, that you have to be completely dedicated to your sport and it has to be everything. And I think that's false. I think, if anything, that can lead to more mental well being issues in the longer term when the career ends. And this one really spoke to me, Josh, because this is, I think, foundational in a lot of the work that I do with players. Because I'm sure this happens with you. Most of the players that come to us, or athletes, it's a lot about winning. It's a lot about how winning and losing makes them feel. And the more we can shift them to purpose and help them find their purpose, and a good starter purpose is always just, well, let's see how good you can get at this. Making that kind of the longer term, right? Having a really long horizon for where we're going, instead of, you have to prove yourself now. I don't care that you're 11 years old. You have to win this match. That's ridiculous. But as athletes become Olympians or they become professional in their sport, they feel this need to dedicate their entire lives to what they're doing. And their whole identity as people can be very wrapped up in their sport. And when that becomes dangerous is if, let's say, there's a career-ending injury, or you're nearing the end of your career, you're getting a little bit older for whatever your sport is, it's going to come to an end. And if it doesn't have a larger purpose, if there isn't a larger purpose in your life that tennis can fit under, then the transition will be difficult. And so you named some things, Josh, that Federer did, starting the foundation when he was 22. That was heavily influenced by his mom. So really great influence there, that he had that in his life. Also a father. He has two sets of twins that they were there with him at Dartmouth. That's another aspect of who he is as a person. And as he noted now, tennis isn't over. It's just maybe transitioning to something. And the idea of maybe not knowing exactly what he's going to do now, that's okay. He'll figure it out. So this one, I think, is very important for all of us to consider, whether many of us are not professional tennis players or professional athletes, but there might be something in your life that are you possibly over-identifying with? Like, if we were to take that away tomorrow, how would you feel? What would you do? Would you feel empty inside? So that might be something to consider. Is, all right, why do I really do this? I think, just like for me in my corporate job, Josh, maybe some of the people know that, like, I worked in corporate jobs probably for about 20 years or so. And I never really connected it to a purpose. I think there were some times where I was trying to be the best I could be at what my job was, but a lot of it was just sort of day to day. And I didn't really enjoy it that much. And, I put that on me, reflecting back. And if I could do it again, I think I would go back with, can I go deep in my field and try to be the best at this and see where that takes me, rather than getting caught up in, maybe corporate politics or things like that. Why don't I have this title, etc. I deserve that. So I would say, my career in corporate America was more or less sabotaged by myself in not having a true purpose of what I was doing. And I think post that, I've tried to shift that into this profession. I've tried to shift it more into, when I do play tennis, it's not so much I have to win today. I'm just always trying to learn and improve. And that has made things so much better in professional life and in something like tennis, or even pursuing something else on the side, that it's all about learning and improving. And it's not about, I have to be good at this right away, or I shouldn't do it. So I really like it. I hope, it's tough when you're giving that speech to people who are, 22 years old and so forth. And I hope a lot of them took it away, what he was trying to get at with that, and to help them really make their mark in the world in a purposeful way.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you sharing that piece of your background as well, Brian. And I think what's interesting about when people sort of make that shift, and it's not all about results, it's not all about achievements, it's all about the process that goes into it, right? It's the what we need to do on a day-to-day basis, trying, aiming for mastery and excellence rather than just results. That we end up often taking a lot of pressure off ourselves, and often the results end up being better anyways. So it's this interesting thing that when we don't have such a tunnel vision on just results, and we focus more on doing things the right way and working hard at something and trying to be the best that we can possibly be, it ends up often leading to the sorts of results that we're after in the first place anyways. So I think that's an interesting point. And Roger also brought up a quote from a Dartmouth football coach, and which is that sort of a strategy that he used to use to recruit players, but it seems like it was something that he probably embodied within his program as well, which was that telling their parents that your son will be a great football player when it's football time, a great student when it's academic time, and a great person all the time. Sort of prioritizing the being a great person, which is a concept we've talked about even in our second episode, where we had Brian Barker. He talked about this very idea of trying to be the best person that you can possibly be and prioritizing that. And we had a recent episode with Ryan Harrison where he talked about the same idea, and as he's become a coach, of trying to help people that he works with just be the best person that they can be, and that leading to them being a better player. I think this idea of better person, better player. I think we can all try to take that into consideration, right? The better person that we can be, the better, the more that we're trying to be just the best that we can be in each aspect of things, right? Trying to master tennis as much as we possibly can, trying to master, just whether it's our professional lives or whether it's our, academics or whatever it may be, the better that we can do with each of these areas, the better person that it makes us overall. And I think, I really like this last point, this last lesson from Roger, because I think it sort of ties a knot on the entire speech and just on his career in general, that it's, yes, he was trying to be the best that he could be. And I think he, in many ways really maximized his ability, but I think his impact really goes a lot further than that and is something that we all can really learn from.
Absolutely. So highly recommend that people take a look and listen to the speech, and also feel free to let us know what you thought of it and if there were some additional nuggets that you got out of Roger's talk. So that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for the two of us, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you are enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube, and you can also check us out on Instagram. If you would like to support the podcast, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership, where you can learn about the benefits of being part of the Tennis IQ podcast community. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.